right, well, I guess we'll begin. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Habitat and Riparian Enhancement Restoration project for Onondaga Creekwalk Phase 2. My name is Lauren Jennison, and I'm one of the consultants on this project with Applied Ecological Services and CC Environment. Few logistics, and then I'll give the microphone to Steve, who will introduce kind of the background of the project. But we'll be on for an hour, and we're going to go through a brief presentation and then open it up to question and answers. I think everyone's muted themselves, but please do turn on your webcam. We'd love to see your faces. And then during the presentation, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box. And then we will also go through polling after the presentation. And after polling, we will then open it up to question and answer. And we would like everyone to kind of raise their hand or if you'd like to, if the raise your hand button isn't working, feel free to speak up. Again, just a few other formatting things. I've kind of gone over these just a bit. But again, questions will be answered in the open forum timeline towards the end. And then this will be our meeting flow. So I'll give the microphone to Steve, who will make our introductions.
Yes, well, hi everybody, Steve Harris, City Arborist, Syracuse Parks Department. I will let members of Onondaga Earth Corps and any additional members at Applied Ecological introduce themselves when it's their turn to speak. The meeting will essentially be broken out into two parts. One will be the presentation of the conceptual plans. Lauren will introduce different design alternatives to find out what people's preferences are. There'll be some polling to capture those preferences. And then after next steps, we'll have an open forum so we can get to people's questions. I'm sure there'll be a lot. A reminder that this is being recorded. So next slide, Lauren. The project before us is an opportunity for the community to help design a new natural landscape from the ground up along a stretch of Onondaga Creekwalk that up until now has been out of sight and inaccessible. Something that community advocates have been trying to bring us to this point now where we can use the Creekwalk as a recreational resource, and here we are. But when the city installed the new stretch of Creekwalk, which we will call Phase 2, we had to remove all the trees on that side. And the unmanaged patch of trees, shrubs, and understory plants that remain are low quality invasive species, mostly that. And left unmanaged, this area will become unattractive and out of control. And simply mowing would be very costly and wouldn't produce many of the benefits that we would get from planting trees and other plants. We wouldn't get shade. We wouldn't enhance the user experience. People like green and color. And we certainly wouldn't improve the ecological diversity of this corridor, which is the prime goal of the grant. So right as construction on Phase 2 was about to begin, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced a grants process for the restoration of natural resources along shorelines inside the Onondaga Lake watershed. Onondaga Creek is one of those places. And these funds were part of a settlement in March 2018. The United States and the state of New York settled with Honeywell and Onondaga County over a natural resource damage claim related to Onondaga Lake Superfund site. And those funds in that grant process is what is called the Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration Program. The city applied for and was awarded 2 grants. One was to establish a new native landscape from Kirk Park to Temple Ave, and another was to install a canoe put-in takeout on the west side of Kirk Park, south of the footbridge. You can see that right now as a platform that's lower, closer to the creek. That project is overseen by the engineering department, Russ Hauk in particular, and they expect construction to begin 2022. Now, the goal of this meeting is to start the process of feedback on how we should design this landscape. The project scope is 4 years. It includes the design process we're going through now, planting of thousands of trees, shrubs, grasses, forbs, and 2 to 3 years of follow-up care, which is a rarity in most of these grants, and something we're excited about so that we can make sure what we plant, we can help get established and thrive. We'll develop this plan over the coming months, shaped by your feedback. There'll be 3 additional meetings to be held, 1 for each design stage. And between now and our next meeting, we'll make sure that we reach any of those who should be involved, but that are not here today or didn't hear about the meeting. No community outreach stone will be unturned to make sure that people had a chance to weigh in on what this corridor should look like. Syracuse Parks, me in particular, is the project manager, and we've hired Applied Ecological to help guide us through the design process. Onondaga Earth Corps will lead the way on community involvement, planting and managing the unruly vegetation that's going to grow along this corridor and that we've been battling for several years as it is. To talk more about their role, I'll turn it over to Tavion Stenson at Onondaga Earth Corps.
Thank you very much, Steve. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you guys all for being in attendance today. So OEC for short, we are a youth and young adult developmental program. So what we strive to do is to empower the young people, in which we work with youth and young adults from the ages of 15 to 25. We just aim to empower them through environmental work and outreach. And so we just strive to, give them a new skill, not just in the field with the actual work, but as well as, things of this nature with just public outreach and building relationships. So just to get into a bit of what we've done pertaining to the Creekwalk project. So our Creekwalk crew, they are responsible for removing invasive species. They will be planting over 3,000 native trees and shrubs over the next 4 years. And just your regular maintenance, as weeding, watering, and monitoring when those invasive species start to come back. We will manage those as they come about. Our youth crew actually started doing some door-to-door outreach last fall, and we were able to knock on about 108 doors, but we directly spoke to about 50 residents. Those areas were about Crescent Ave, Rockland Ave, Bissell Street, Dearborn Place, Ballard, Cortland Ave, Hudson, Midland, just kind of your surrounding streets around the various sections in which Steve just mentioned and what we will talk about later on in the presentation. That typically is done leaving a flyer at the door for those who, as I mentioned, may not have been home or who we cannot directly have a conversation with. We do look forward to your input today, so please do not be shy. Share your comments and input with us. We will be continuing that door-to-door outreach over the next several weeks and also leading into the summer. So you will definitely see us. And for those who may not be familiar with our actual work, I'll use those young trees that you see with the 2 wooden stakes on the side. 90% of those trees were planted by Earth Corps. So anytime you see us out in the field, we love to engage with you guys in person. So please feel free to say hello. But as mentioned before, this session will be recorded, so we will have this info. But please do not shy away from sharing your input and questions, as it is very important, to us to get your input to be a part of future plans during this project. So without moving any forward with this, I'm going to pass it over to Lauren.
Thank you, Tay. I'm actually going to give the mic to Ben, except my slide is not moving. Oh, there we go. Okay. So Ben Zimmerman with AES will introduce us, the consultants. We're very happy to be here. And myself, Ben, and Sheila with CC Environment are on the line to field any questions further down on the, during this presentation. So Ben, take it away.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, and good early afternoon, everybody. I'm Ben Zimmerman. I'm a restoration ecologist and manager in our New York office here, and work closely with Lauren. I don't know if Lauren said this, but she is a landscape architect with AES and CC Environment and Planning, also on our team. And Sheila Hess is on the line here with CC Environment. I think we can go to the next slide, Lauren. So there's three basic phases to this approach for the Creekwalk. We're in this first phase right now. So site analysis and investigation, and what we're doing right now, which is the public outreach aspect. And that will move to schematic design, or further the schematic design. Second phase, we'll take all the info from these investigations and analysis, take the outreach, all the info we gather from this meeting, and we'll develop technical documents and specifications that will guide phase three, which is moving into implementation and construction. Okay, next slide.
No.
Part of the slide didn't download.
Okay.
Technical difficulties.
Oh no. All right, one second. I have a PowerPoint in case this happened.
There you go, the
Or
backup.
a PDF.
Thank you, Lauren.
So let me.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Lauren, I cut you off there.
Okay, hopefully this works for everyone. Sorry about that.
It's okay, we can see everything, at least I can. So, context of the phase two, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds here, but a long linear feature like this crosses a lot of different environments, existing green space in your different communities, and we really hope that people who live in these communities are on this call, and OEC is doing outreach like they already said, which is wonderful. There's a few images of the Creekwalk as it exists now. I think we can move to the next slide, Lauren. So being a creek, there's the creekside environment is referred to as riparian. So a lot of this is focused on riparian restoration. And whenever you're talking about restoration, you have to think about this term succession, which is kind of the change over time of an environment that occurs naturally. So this is a nice diagram on the right that shows what we would refer to as like a climax community, which would be a closed canopy environment. And a disturbance event can and will occur and opens up resources to the ground level, which kind of restarts this whole process of succession. So open canopy, disturbance occurs, and then provides light and water and other resources for grasses and other herbaceous vegetation to grow. And that transitions into eventually woody vegetation, typically shrubs. And then that moves to a younger forest community and shrub community, and then eventually closed canopy. This all takes a lot of time to occur, and different factors affect the timeline. In the left here is there's a picture here on this slide, just a nice open canopy environment, and it looks like bottle brush grass in the understory there, but just showing how you have some canopy, but you don't have much understory there, which is allowing light and allowing that herbaceous layer to grow. Next slide. Here's a cross section that's typical of the Creekwalk. I will add, before I forget to mention it, that nothing is being proposed with the actual Onondaga Creek channel. That will remain as it is currently. And then also although this is representative, the channel does narrow and the bank steepen in some areas, as many of you are probably aware. So this isn't representative of all of the Creekwalk. I'll start with the upland zones, which are on the far right and left. much of that will remain the same, which is kind of a canopy with mowed lawn type of an understory. But there are select areas that, you know, we need your input on how to enhance and restore these areas as well. And there'll be more information as we move forward in this presentation. So the riparian zone is really the focus of this restoration because it makes up the majority of the area. And if you can't tell, that is inside the existing fence. So within this area, you know, there are a number of approaches which Lauren will roll out. And then the other zone in play is this riparian flood zone, which is down closer to the creek. In some areas, it's very well defined. In other areas, it's more of a steep and straight transition to the creek. Next slide, please. Existing conditions. This is some photos of the site this last growing season. As Steve alluded to, there are many non-native invasive species that dominate this community, and that goes from canopy trees to shrub layer to herbaceous layer, so really across the board. And there are some natives that exist there, but most of those are quote unquote weedier natives. For example, in the top left, the red leaves you can see there are staghorn sumac. Bottom left is some of the areas as it's being transitioned already from OEC into more of a native dominated community. So with that, next slide, and I believe I will be handing it off to Lauren here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ben. Excellent. So I'm going to review the breakdown of the sections for phase 2, and I'm going to try to do that in 10 minutes. So please bear with me because I want to get into polling. But section 2 is the beginning of phase 2. It starts at West Taylor and ends at Midland Avenue, and it is one of the more narrow sections that we'll be working with for the riparian zone. Half of this area has a retaining wall built up for that creekwalk. But what this section does provide is actually three lots where we can enhance your upland areas or more of that traditional park setting of large shade trees and open lawn. So Ben mentioned the typical section in that last slide, but I just kind of want to review that again because we've color coordinated everything based on those zones. So the green areas are the upland restoration zones. Orange is the more traditional riparian zone, looking at your upland riparian and then floodplain riparian where it makes sense on the site. Purple and red are more of an aesthetic application. So your purple areas will be your understory, so flowering trees and that do well in underneath shaded canopy trees. And then in red, you have opening up view sheds with applications of low shrubs and a few canopy trees intermixed where it makes sense. So here, again, making sure that we're keeping significant views open, especially along roadways and intersections, and then certain points along the trail that kind of have a high value or cultural link to them. And then we're going to move on to the Midland Avenue concept. So that northern green upland area, this is 3 lots, and the city does own the central lot, which is kind of that T shape. This lot in particular, there is a new fence that was constructed. So there is a barrier from the creekwalk to this lot. The fence will have to remain for 10 years, but we do have an option of removing portions of that fence or all of it if the community desires this lot opened to that creekwalk area. So we would love feedback on one of those particular viewpoints moving forward. But currently we've proposed kind of a gathering space, so walkway up to a council ring or overview area. And intermixed with this are formal landscape beds that either can become, typical native landscaping beds, or rain gardens along with agroforestry areas. To the south of that is a larger, more significant rain garden that ASLF is looking into for this site, and then the Oxford Green area as well, which I'll go into in a second. But again, focusing on this central lot, and then we are working with the other parcel owners to see what other programs are available for this space. And then your Oxford Green area. So runs along Midland Avenue, significant open space for this area, right across the street from a very popular community garden that has a great youth program involved in the neighborhood. So making sure that this remains, more of a traditional park area. There is new fence along this with some linear canopy trees. But what we propose is to further enhance that canopy, especially along the Creekwalk, and then adding in landscape beds with traditional native landscaping, lower shrubs, and then evergreens as well. Some other opportunities for this space, formal gathering areas, recreational fields, nature play or play zones. And then ASLF is also looking at applying a rain garden in this area as well, if the community is in favor of that. Moving down to section 3. So section 3 begins at Midland Avenue and then ends at South Avenue. And then you've got Dr. Martin Luther King West Drive, which kind of buffers a large expanse of this upland restoration area, which is in that southeast, kind of that triangle green shape in the corner here. But what we're looking at here is really enhancing the view sheds of this area. This is a really beautiful lot, especially with the new trail and then the minor trail that was pre-existing from before, which has been kind of incorporated into this space. There are rain gardens existing on this site, so enhancing that upland area by proposing additional canopy trees or shade trees, and then looking at opportunities where we could incorporate some shrub clusters if deemed appropriate. But here, especially for the riparian zone, keeping a lot of the views open, and then making sure, since this could be a very welcoming programmed area for the community, I think this section in particular would be preferred to be kept relatively open with an open shade structure. And then moving down to section 4, this is pretty much runs along South Avenue and is adjacent to the new splash pad park that was incorporated, I believe, a year ago, but it is brand new to the neighborhood, very popular amenity, and it abuts the lower Onondaga Park, which is also a very popular area with significant history. This section in particular is very narrow, and there is fence line included in this space. It's almost as narrow as section 2, but here there's a nice blend of upland and riparian, especially in the upland area along the roadway, where we propose a significant amount of canopy trees, and then blending that into the riparian zone. Here you have opportunity to kind of get into that upland riparian and then the floodplain riparian area as the zone opens up in width. One concept for this area on Rich Street, the Rich Street Green. At the moment, this is an open mown lot, and the Creekwalk has a meeting space here with proposed signage and a bench, so a great seating area. there are also very large homes adjoining this roadway. So what we've proposed for this concept is internalizing your shade structure. So bringing it out from that riparian zone, but keeping it in that central node of the space. So you're not cutting off the views from those homes, and then making sure that the space is kept safe for everyone. Other opportunities here are clusters of agroforestry or native landscaping beds. This is also a great area for pollinator gardens, but making sure this is a bit more lower maintenance, so focusing more on shrub species in this area. And then moving down to section 5. So this is kind of the last section of the phase 2 restoration area, and the majority of your program space minus section 2. But here you have a significant upland restoration area adjoining the trail, and then you have the Traveler's Rest building. On the east side, Steve has been working really hard to clear this space adjoining Kirk Park. So this section in particular will be moving rather quickly in the schematic design phase, since the majority of that eastern portion has been cleared, if not everything has been cleared. So we will be focusing on enhancing this area rather quickly, proposing mainly your more traditional riparian shade structure, also making sure that view sheds are incorporated in this area, since you have significant spaces such as Traveler's Rest. There is an educational space to the north, and then the canoe launch going into the south. There's also a new parking lot off of Hunt that we'll be looking at as well. And here's a quick concept for the Traveler's Rest area. It's a beautiful building with great stonework in this area, something that can definitely be enhanced through a gathering space or concession space. Also will become a very popular area with canoers, kayakers, tubers, and bicyclists as well. Behind Traveler's Rest, we are looking at incorporating a majority of the native landscaping space along phase 2. And this northern portion will become a shade garden, and then the southern portion would be your sun garden or pollinator garden. Other options that we're looking at are incorporating culturally valued species and not just pollinator species. And then a quick sketch of Hunt Avenue. At the moment, Hunt Avenue is a new asphalt parking area. So looking at extending native landscaping along that south and east area of the parking lot. Doing this mainly with low growing shrubs and shade trees. And then north, incorporating more of the native landscaping, low shrubs into that canoe launch area as well. And now we'll get into kind of what the plant palette looks like for these zones that we're speaking of. The upland restoration area, again, more of that traditional park-like setting where you're enhancing the area with large canopy trees. So we're looking at sugar maple, hackberry, Kentucky coffee tree, although not necessarily native to the area, it does provide significant fall color and structure in specific areas. Also bur oak, red oak, and basswood. And then your riparian zones. So we've broken this area into kind of 2 zones depending on the sections, but your traditional more upland riparian area and then your floodplain restoration area. So your drier trees, upland, so looking at bitternut hickory, working with smaller specimens as allowed. tulip poplar, ironwood, red oak, and yellow birch. And then closer to the creek, we're looking at black gum, sycamore, pawpaw, swamp white oak, and musclewood. And here's just a representation of what that understory restoration could look like with some of those flowering understory trees and shrubs. So also keeping in mind that this space can become thick, so we're considering the spacing that would go into this area as well. And then your view shed low shrub restoration areas. And this is definitely more of a landscape aesthetic than a riparian restoration program. So keeping in mind that we still want to enhance the canopy structure, so we're adding in or looking at tulip poplar and sycamore scattered within these zones, but then looking at black chokeberry, winterberry, spice bush, chokecherry, fragrant sumac, to name just a few. Here we have some of the native landscaping representations. Some of the shrubs we're looking at are New Jersey tea, also looking to incorporate evergreens such as your eastern red cedar. Getting into the kind of perennial matrix, little blue stem would be our predominant grass. And then you have your flowering pollinator species, such as milkweeds, mints, and asters. And in those particular shaded areas, we have quite an assortment that we're proposing, such as bush honeysuckle, geranium, columbine. Sensitive fern is a particularly exceptional ground cover, as is wild ginger. And then we'll get into some other flowering perennials as well. So I hope I didn't move too quickly or overwhelm you, but that's just a breakdown of our concepts to date for each section. And this is really an intro, so where we definitely want to hear your feedback, what you'd like to see in each of these sections for some of the concepts that were proposed. And then our high-level concepts will then be moved forward into schematic design, where you have more of your traditional like landscape plans. But saying that, let's jump into polling. So Yvonne is going to proctor this poll. And I just want to give Yvonne a little bit of time. There we go. All right. So first question that we'd love to hear your feedback on is, what is your preferred aesthetic and program for the Midland lot? That is the northernmost lot for section 2. Currently closed off from the Creekwalk. Okay.
What if you want to change your answer?
What if you want more than one?
I know we're kind of stuck with the polling mechanisms we have. If you would love to see more than one option, let's bring it up in the chat box and we can look at it in question and answers. And then we'll kind of also go through our next steps of how to address some wishes in the area and who to contact. But I'm going to end.
Can you remind me where this space is again?
Midland Ave space is in section 2, so it's that first open lot off of Midland Avenue.
What's the cross street there? Midland and?
It's Midland and Midland, so it's where Midland
by Central. Kind of by Central?
Bellevue, Midland and Bellevue.
There you
Oh,
go.
okay. All right. Yeah, that would be.
So here it is.
Okay. Yeah.
We don't have any other attendees voting right now. We're at 25 or 33. Do you want to continue?
No, let's end the polling. I think this is great.
Oh, the last few are answering now.
All right, we'll give you 2 more seconds. It's really fun to see how quickly these change. All right,
It's so
well, end
exciting. It's so exciting to see this beauty.
it is. Okay, so a majority voted for green open space with that canopy structure and possibly incorporating community gardens or beautification areas. All right, and here are the results. Oops. All right, Yvonne, I'm going to let you control that. But I'd like to move on to the second polling question. So on the Midland lot, a new fence is in place at minimum for 10 years. After 10 years, would you be in favor of opening the lot to the trail? And I'm going to only give this 1 more minute. Since it's pretty straightforward, but the way the poll is running right now, most people are in favor of opening that lot up. Okay, can I get a few more votes and then we'll end the poll? All right, let's close this poll. So most people are in favor, which is great to hear. So I
Why
think
is it that it's 10 years that the fence has to be in place?
the 10-year limitation is based on the funding that was used for a portion of this creek walk.
That things that were paid for had to be maintained for 10 years?
With my understanding, yes.
Fine.
Now, if
One other thought, when we're making these choices about what we might like, should we be giving any consideration to the need for choices that we make to be maintained? For example, if you choose play and recreation areas, there is a certain amount of maintenance the city would be responsible for in order to keep them functional. And those funds are not necessarily available. That's, of course, part of the problem we had with the creek to begin with, that there were never any funds available to maintain the areas along that. And funding is likely to be a continuing issue for the city.
most definitely, and yes, we should definitely keep in mind the maintenance involved in most of these programmed amenities, especially with the number of like landscaping beds or, as you mentioned, park kind of recreational structures or fields, knowing that maintenance budgets are limited. So yes, just keep that in mind. And then if you do have additional comments, please type those into the chat box. And we can also address that after this meeting as well, if you have other things to share too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the next question. We have 5 polls, so I'd like to get through these rather quickly and then open it up to more questions. So what is your preferred aesthetic and program for the Oxford Green open space? And this was the corner lot just south of the Midland lot.
I'm trying to pick formal gathering, but I'm unable to.
Not sure why that is, but I can make note of it. Okay, we'll take a few more seconds, missing a few people, and then working through any glitches. At the moment, it looks like votes are buried. There's the thing with this space is, there's so much you can do with, but definitely keeping in mind what would be appropriate and what would be valued. Okay, we're gonna end polling. So the overall winner was green open space with clusters of native landscaping, tree and shrub beds, with community gardens or agroforestry second. Excellent. All right, next question. Please select your top 2 desired looks for upland spaces. And this is mainly for sections 3, 4, and 5.
Is there a place where we can do like for seating for our older people? Because we do have a lot of older people in that area. I just don't see it. Can you make note of that?
Definitely, I can make note of seating. There are also, with the phase 2 Creekwalk construction, there are new seating areas and educational or interpretive signage areas that have been included. But I can definitely make note of additional seating that could be valued.
That would be a very good addition. You're encouraging walking this Creekwalk from residential neighborhoods up toward the lake. And a lot of us are a little bit older than some of the people involved in doing this planning. And we like to be able to sit down every once in a while and catch our breath. So not just for seating for people to go in there and sit, but all along this frequent occurrence of benches would be probably not a bad idea.
Definitely noted.
Thank you.
Okay, so note on the seating, but let's end this poll. Views were pretty mixed on this. And I understand this, all of these applications can be used in specific areas where it's deemed appropriate. But it's still nice to see that there's a need or desire for enhancing the upland canopy structure. So our 5th question, last question here. In areas of expansive riparian clearing of invasive trees and brush, what is your preferred replacement aesthetic? And this question's quite similar to number 4. This just happens to be specific to the riparian zone. And also looking at opportunities for additional seating or rest areas in some of those highlighted areas of low shrub or ornamental tree view sheds. But again, we would love to get feedback of kind of the aesthetic you're looking for the riparian area. And so far, it looks to be a mixture of shade, understory, and shrubs.
Not to make too much of this, but one of the things that you need to keep in mind with any of these designs is, and apparently with the funding, there is some continuation for a year or two of maintenance, but the creek walk, or the creek in its current or its earlier condition before you did this phase 2, was largely invisible because of overgrowth and inattention for years. And city parks budgets being what they have been and are likely to be, the maintenance required to keep these things looking the way they were planted is going to be challenging. Is there any way to do some of this? Probably not, and choose vegetation or things that tend not to go crazy and eventually be far larger and far more obtrusive than they started out to be without careful tending or careful pruning. That's probably an impossible request, but it might be something for you to consider.
I will say we are definitely considering favorable plant species, also looking at the amount of invasive material that will be cleared out and how you treat those areas with new plant materials, specifically shading out kind of the seed bed left over from those invasives with low shrubs or your more prolific canopy trees. But yes, definitely keeping in mind the maintenance of a lot of the upland trees involved, and then the rate of growth that a lot of these species have. And in addition, also looking at spacing.
Trees are somewhat less of a problem. They do tend to grow up and get a little out of the way. It's more shrubs and things of that nature. Anyway, the point has been made. I don't want to belabor it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And yes, we definitely will be, we're keeping all of that in mind, knowing, maintenance will be an ongoing.
Yeah, it has the potential to be non-existent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're going to end polling. So thank you everyone for sharing your votes. And then I just want to go through our next steps really quickly, and then we'll open it up to further questions. So we will have a follow-up meeting to this, like Steve mentioned, towards the end of April, where feedback from this meeting will be taken and our concepts will be further developed. And then section 5 especially will be developed more into a schematic design / construction document. So we'll be sharing all of that towards the end of April. If once this meeting ends, we're kind of running out of time quickly. So additional feedback, please email myself or Ben directly. And if you'd love to share images with us or take a walk along the Creekwalk, share some of your favorite views, significant areas, etc., please send that information to us.